Elementary School, Allegheny Middle School, and Alderdice High School.
Just after 11 in the morning, inside the Destiny of Faith Church, loved ones gathered to say their final goodbyes to 20-year-old John James Horn, Jr. A heavy silence filled the sanctuary, thick with the weight of grief. But just outside the church doors, that solemn quiet was about to be shattered. Suddenly, the sharp report of gunshots ripped through the neighborhood. Inside, screams erupted as mourners scrambled for cover. A service intended as a final farewell instantly descended into chaos. And just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, they did. Tragically, this wasn't the first time violence had touched John's name. Only days before, he himself had been the victim of a fatal shooting at a Pittsburgh gas station. And now, the same people who had come to mourn his loss were caught in the crossfire of yet another attack. Outside, the gunfire raged on. When the chaos subsided, 6 people were wounded. What was meant to be a place of mourning had been turned into the scene of an ambush. The question was, why target a funeral? Who was behind the attack, and how could such brutality erupt in a sanctuary of peace? The answers, as investigators would soon discover, would point not just to 2 teenagers, but also to a catastrophic breakdown in police protection that left everyone at the service dangerously exposed. But before we get into the details, if you find this case as compelling as we do, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts on it down below. It's a huge help for the channel. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation. We appreciate your support. This content is intended for educational and documentary purposes only. It is not meant to endorse or glorify or condone any of the criminal acts or individuals involved in this case. Due to the mature subject matter, viewer discretion is advised. John James Horn Jr. was born in 2002, right in the heart of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was a product of his environment, shaped as much by his neighborhood as he was by his family. On the surface, to those who didn't know him well, John could seem reserved, but for the people who truly spent time with him, they saw a young man with a steady, grounding presence. His friends described him as calm, but never cold or distant. He possessed a quiet strength that others naturally leaned on. Just sitting next to John, without a single word exchanged, you'd get the feeling that everything was going to be all right. One of his greatest passions in life was basketball. For John, it was more than just a game. It provided rhythm and structure. On the court, he transformed from just another neighborhood kid. He was focused, completely in the zone, and alive in a way that made it clear to anyone watching just how much that game meant to him. Teammates and friends recall how he could spend countless hours just shooting hoops, whether it was in a crowded gym or alone, with only the squeak of his sneakers and the echo of the ball against the backboard. When life got heavy, the court was his anchor, but his character wasn't just defined on the basketball court. John was also known for small, quiet acts of kindness that left a lasting impression on everyone he met. As his cousin once put it, if John had $2 and you had nothing, he'd make sure you both had one. Is no porter, is it demoted? End of in. That was just the kind of person he was, someone who would give you the shirt off his back or check in on a friend going through a tough time, even when he was carrying his own heavy load. John grew up on Pittsburgh's North Side, attending local schools, and like a lot of kids in his community, he did his best to stay out of trouble. But in that environment, it wasn't always easy. Opportunities were scarce, and the line between making it and getting into real danger was often razor thin. He wasn't perfect, he'd made his share of mistakes, but those closest to him never once questioned where his heart was. The pressures of his surroundings were undeniable. There was gang activity, simmering neighborhood tensions, and old grudges that refused to die. In that part of the city, trouble had a way of finding young men, even the ones who weren't looking for it. Through it all, his family never lost faith in him. His mother once confided in a neighbor, saying, "John has a good heart. All he wants is to live a good life, to find some peace." And that, right there, was the heart of the tragedy. John wasn't trying to be a legend or a hero. He wasn't chasing the limelight. All he wanted was a fair shot at a better life. But that opportunity was violently stripped away on October 15th, 2022. On that day, John's story was abruptly cut short by a sudden eruption of violence, and in the aftermath, the chaos that started on a city street would begin to ripple outward, eventually reaching the steps of the very church where his family gathered to say their final goodbyes on the morning of October 15th, 2022. The day started like any other. John James Hornacys Jr. had made plans to hang out with two of his closest friends. Their meeting spot was the Sunoco gas station on Cedar Avenue, a place John knew well. To them, it was just another normal hangout. They were just talking and joking around, killing time like young guys do, completely unaware of how their ordinary morning was about to come undone as an SUV slowly cruised by, and in a split second, the quiet was shattered. Gunfire erupted from the vehicle, and John and his friends instantly returned fire. A firefight broke out right in the middle of the street. What started as a surprise attack quickly escalated into a full-blown shootout. It was fast, chaotic, and deadly, but they weren't the only ones caught in the crossfire. At a bus stop just feet away, two women, Betty Everett and Jacqueline Mahalik, were complete 20, just waiting for their bus. In an instant, they were struck down in a battle that was never theirs to fight. Betty didn't make it. For her family and the entire community, it was a senseless loss, an act of violence that struck without warning and left only devastation behind. Onlookers were frozen in terror. Some hit the deck, while others scrambled for cover behind cars and gas pumps, praying for the gunfire to stop. The entire block descended into chaos and desperation. The city's normal rhythm shattered in a matter of seconds. And in the middle of it all was John. A bullet from the SUV hit him, and he went down. According to officers, his weapon was found lying right beside him. In that instant, John, who just hours before was casually making plans with his friends, became one of the 3 people who lost their lives at the scene. Within moments, 911 operators were flooded with calls reporting shots fired on Cedar Avenue. Officers raced to the scene. By the time they got there, the Sunoco was no longer just a local gas station. It had become a major crime scene. 3 people were gone: John, Betty, and Jacqueline. Detectives immediately got to work, trying to piece together what happened. Witnesses were scattered and shaken, struggling to make sense of the horror they'd just seen. Surveillance footage, shell casings, and the statements from terrified bystanders would all be crucial in reconstructing the timeline of events. To the investigators, it was clear this wasn't just about one man. The violence that morning was a symptom of something much bigger, something that would soon spill over into the very funeral meant to honor John's memory. In the days following the gas station shootout, the police began to move, making arrests. Their first suspect in custody was Sharon Troutman, who was only 19 years old. Investigators alleged he was inside the SUV during the firefight. He was charged with homicide for the death of John James Hornacys Jr. His arrest was the first concrete step forward in what was quickly becoming a sprawling investigation. But Troutman wasn't alone in facing charges. A 21-year-old named Jalen Hines, who was actually with John and had been injured in the shootout, was also taken into custody. Prosecutors claimed he fired the shots that killed Betty Everett and Jacqueline Mahalik, the 2 innocent women at the bus stop. Suddenly, the narrative of that October morning became much more complicated, and for the community, the arrests stirred up a mix of emotions. On one hand, there was relief that people were being held accountable.
Families of 59-year-old Betty Averett and 33-year-old Jacqueline Mihalik are one step closer to justice.
I'm heartbroken and my soul is empty.
This is just so painful.
The two women were just sitting at a bus stop on Cedar Avenue when a shootout between several people took their lives.
But on the other, the reality was grim. Multiple families had now been torn apart, and the full truth of who fired the fatal shots was now tangled up in the legal system. The puzzle was a long way from being solved. As the courts started the long process of sorting out who was responsible, John's family was left to deal with the rawest part of the tragedy: his sudden absence. They had lost their son. He was a brother, a cousin, the rock that anchored their family. All they were asking for was one last chance to say goodbye, a chance to gather at the church, mourn with dignity, and find some small measure of peace in laying him to rest. But that peace would never come. Instead, the very service meant to bring closure erupted into something far more terrifying. The moment, dedicated to honoring John's life, was shattered by a fresh round of gunfire, plunging his family deeper into grief and the entire community further into fear.
Anybody that would just not take any value in that life is not someone that needs to be on our streets.
City leaders, including Mayor Ed Gainey and Pittsburgh police, say they've seen enough.
On some senseless shooting over some argument that automatically ended up in gunplay.
I'm tired of seeing mothers crying. I'm tired of seeing people in pain. I'm tired of seeing situations like
conflict resolution that's going to be resolved with gunfire is going to result in innocent victims like you see in this particular case. Their lives are cut short for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Respect for life and innocent lives that we've seen. Just over the last several weeks, we've had multiple people not involved in the incident struck by gunfire.
Just 2 short weeks after the gas station tragedy that took his life, John's family gathered once more, this time at the Destiny of Faith Church on Brighton Road. The date was October 28, 2022. Inside, the church was filled with over 100 mourners, praying, weeping, and desperately clinging to the hope that this final farewell would bring them some solace. The air itself felt heavy with sorrow, but just outside the church walls, a different scene was unfolding. At 11 a.m., the solemn silence was broken. One shot rang out, then another. Within seconds, that was followed by a barrage of gunfire. Inside the sanctuary, mourners ducked, panicked, and scrambled for any available cover. By 11:04, the solemn service had descended into absolute chaos. Witnesses would later recall hearing the distinct sound of rounds hitting the church doors. Some dove under the pews while others ran, completely unsure of where to find safety. The sound of screams began to mix with the relentless gunfire. Outside, a place that should have been a sanctuary of faith had been transformed into a scene of terror. It was surveillance cameras that would later reveal the attackers, 2 figures in dark clothing and masks, later identified as 16-year-old Hezekiah Nixon and 19-year-old Sean Davis, as they crossed the street directly toward the church. The footage showed them moving slowly, methodically scanning the building with weapons in hand. They moved with deliberate steps, waited for the perfect moment, and then unleashed a hail of bullets on the crowd. Inside, people instinctively tried to shield one another. Survivors would later recount the sheer desperation of the moment, their hearts pounding, their bodies frozen in fear, their minds struggling to comprehend how a funeral could become the next target. One witness described it as completely unreal, that the very place they came to grieve was now a second crime scene. But the assailants didn't hesitate. Their shots seemed indiscriminate, not aimed at any one person. It appeared their sole objective was to sow chaos and spread terror. In that moment, the question wasn't just who was behind the attack, but why anyone would choose a funeral of all places to commit such a heinous act. As the gunfire raged outside, emergency calls flooded the dispatch center, all reporting an active shooter at Destiny of Faith Church. Within minutes, the neighborhood was filled with the sound of approaching sirens. Police and paramedics swarmed the scene, working quickly to pull the injured to safety. A line of ambulances soon formed on Brighton Road, rushing the wounded to nearby hospitals.
A mass shooting outside a Pittsburgh funeral, AGH president and critical care physician Dr. Amran Quadr briefed reporters on the 5 shooting victims being treated here. He says 4 are in stable condition, 1 in critical condition and is still undergoing surgery.
We first received an alert at about 12:13, and within 10 minutes we received the patients. There were 5 patients, 1 critical, 4 stable, and we were at level 1 trauma center, and we were ready for the response. We stabilized the patients quickly.
Did each shooting victim suffer multiple gunshot wounds?
I can't give you the details, but some of them, yes.
A little scared, yeah. Then my niece is in there shot, and my great nephew's in there shot.
2 of the victims being treated right now is related to Darnell Harris. He was inside Destiny Faith Church for his great nephew's funeral, 20-year-old John Hornes, when gunfire erupted.
They was doing service like talking of the eulogy or yeah, they were doing that, and all of a sudden we heard gunfire. They just said gunfire, had to bang on the door, and then all of a sudden you hung gunfire, and everybody started dropping to the floor.
Harris tells me bullets hit 2 of his relatives, his 57-year-old niece and 24-year-old nephew, both standing outside. His niece was shot in the leg, foot, and hand. Her husband drove her to the hospital. Harris is still stunned and is shocked by these shootings.
This is just senseless to me. It's like y'all doing senseless stuff here. You know what I mean? I was born and raised here, but I don't live here no more. But this is crazy. It's just crazy.
In all, 5 people were hit but survived their physical injuries. For them, and for the entire community, survival did not mean recovery. The trauma was immense. The funeral meant to honor John's memory had only added another layer of unimaginable pain. The peace his family had so desperately prayed for was now completely gone. The service had become another tragic headline, another major investigation, and another deep scar on a neighborhood already struggling to heal. This is the moment shots rang out, sending mourners scrambling for their lives outside the Destiny of Faith Church in Brighton Heights. This surveillance video from last October captures the chaos, as a family saying their final goodbyes to a loved one was caught in the crossfire. The footage was later played in a courtroom on a Friday afternoon. While officers secured the chaotic scene outside the Destiny of Faith Church, investigators immediately turned their attention to the evidence. Their most critical lead came from surveillance cameras positioned on the church itself and along nearby streets. The footage was chillingly clear, showing 2 masked individuals who would be identified as Hezekiah Nixon and Sean Davis, walking with purpose toward the building. Just minutes later, those same cameras captured them fleeing the scene and jumping into a dark-colored sedan. That exact vehicle, a black sedan, was then spotted speeding away from Brighton Heights just moments after the shooting. It didn't take long. Within hours, detectives found the vehicle ditched just a short distance from the church. This discovery was the crucial break they needed. Not only did they have the shooters on video, but now they had the actual getaway car. From that point, police began to trace the car's path, following it west toward McKees Rocks, just a quick drive from the crime scene. Officers narrowed the search grid until, only a few hours later, they found exactly what they were looking for. Nixon and Davis were still in the area, trying to make their escape, but their plan was falling apart fast. They ended up stuck in traffic, with no way to outmaneuver the patrol units closing in on them. Within seconds, the entire situation flipped, as officers swarmed the vehicle. The 2 teenagers made a run for it, but there was nowhere to go. Right there, on that street in McKees Rocks, both suspects were taken into custody.
The 2 shooters were seen on video running from the scene. According to the criminal complaint, police determined the suspects ran to a Hyundai Elantra, and they identified the license plate on surveillance video. Just before 6 p.m. Friday, police stopped Nixon and Davis in the vehicle on the McKees Rocks Bridge.
You got 2 in custody.
In court documents, it says Nixon ran from the vehicle and threw a firearm into the river, and Davis dropped a gun on the roadway.
See if we can get any kind of divers here. We're going to need this weapon.
Now, more than ever, community members are wondering what it will take to stop the violence.
They were immediately hit with charges of attempted homicide, aggravated assault, and multiple firearms violations. Detectives also started looking into their possible connections to the gas station shootout that happened earlier, potentially linking them to not one, but 2 separate acts of violence. The legal trouble they were in was severe, and the case against them was getting stronger by the day.
Attorneys for both Nixon and Davis say you cannot tell who the shooters are in the video. Casey White is representing Nixon.
The individuals who did the shooting are covered in all black, dressed in all black, and they are unidentifiable.
He shared all of this is a lot for his client to unpack as he awaits trial.
You know, he's disappointed with the result. I think he was happy to see that there are a lot of holes in the Commonwealth's case.
The suspects will be back in court in March for their formal arraignment.
But while investigators had their guys, John's family was left with a wound that no arrest could possibly heal. An immense grief weighed them down. For John's family,
Just a few hours later, Pittsburgh police arrested 19-year-old Sean Davis, seen in this mugshot, and 16-year-old Hezekiah Nixon. The teens face charges of attempted homicide, criminal conspiracy, and aggravated assault.
We were standing in the vestibule, and when you turn around, you see the whole front of the church. And you see these people running with these weapons, shooting at other young men.
George Moses, a church trustee, is thankful to be alive.
Fortunately for me, a young woman who I don't know her name pushed me out the way. I fell on the ground.
Court documents detail how surveillance video shows 2 males walking towards the church holding guns with extended magazines. The criminal complaint says one of the suspects could be seen firing shots towards the front of the church, and the other suspect fired multiple shots at one of the victims on the sidewalk and chased the victim while firing a gun. The complaint says a horse that was used to pull a carriage holding a casket appeared to be struck by gunfire. The horse was hit by multiple bullet fragments. The shooting lasted for less than a minute.
the fear of retaliation had been a constant threat in the days leading up to the funeral. They had openly voiced these concerns. They even filed a formal request for a police presence, worried that the tensions around his death could explode again. But on the morning of the service, there were no officers in sight. The request had gone unanswered, and when the chaos of gunfire erupted, the complete absence of protection made the tragedy that much harder to swallow. Their worst fears had become a brutal reality.
This live, and Rick, I understand you just learned that the police officers that were requested by the church were not there.
Yeah, that's right, Lisa. Multiple family members here outside the hospital were telling me this afternoon that police officers were supposed to be at that funeral, but they say no one ever showed up. Now, I did speak with a law enforcement source just a short time ago. They confirmed that two Pittsburgh police officers were assigned to that detail. But those officers at the very last minute were pulled for another assignment. After completing that other assignment, those officers planned to return to the funeral, and that's when the shots were fired and the shooting broke out. Again, my source telling me it's not normal procedure for Pittsburgh police officers to attend these funerals, but they suspect there was somebody anticipating possible trouble at that site, and that's why those officers may have been requested in the first place. Again, those officers pulled for another assignment, and then they were going back to the church, and when they were on their way back, the shooting happened.
At the heart of the city's response was Mayor Ed Gainey. His words were heavy with both grief and frustration. "This is senseless. This cannot be our future," he stated publicly, pleading with Pittsburgh to confront its cycle of violence head-on. But no matter how heartfelt, words couldn't undo what had been done. For the families left to pick up the pieces, the scars would last a lifetime, far longer than any news cycle.
The shooting was targeted. Sources tell KDKA those connected to the funeral victim fired shots at rivals in the Spring Hill neighborhood. And today may have been the latest retaliation in an escalating war.
We believe there's a dispute going on. We're looking into that. We're going to utilize all the resources as we have been doing currently, and we'll continue to do so. There will be a strong police presence in the areas of concern.
Mayor Ed Gainey arrived on the scene looking at the damage along Brighton Road, including cars littered with bullet holes.
We need to make sure that this never happens again. And we will be working around the clock to do whatever's necessary to apprehend those that did this heinous thing today.
I just think these young boys are just don't care about anybody's life, not even their own.
That you would come into or come around the church and shoot up.
The demand for change echoed throughout Pittsburgh. People talked about breaking the cycle, about finding some way to stop the violence before it claimed another home, another family, another funeral. But the path forward was anything but clear for John's family and for the entire community, united in grief. The questions just hung in the air. How many more lives had to be lost before things would change? And what would it finally take to prevent another tragedy like this one? As of this recording, the trials are still moving through the system. Neither Sean Davis nor Hezekiah Nixon has been handed a final sentence for the funeral shooting. The courts continue to decide their futures, while John's family is still left searching for some kind of peace. What do you think is the right outcome in cases like this? Share your thoughts with us in the comments, and if you want to find out how this trial ends and whether justice is finally served, make sure you stay tuned. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this story is far from over.